Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of the PI Filmmaker podcast. Now, last few weeks I've had guests again, but it's me on my own again this week for one of my monologues. And today I'm thinking about the process of finishing a film, because Notion is coming towards the end of post-production, but in the meantime, there's lots of niggly tasks that need doing. So just this week I've been working on sharpening some shots. So there was a sequence in which we had this location a very limited amount of time. And this is what I mean when I talk about independent filmmaking. You're working around obstacles and limitations. So we had this location for a limited amount of time. And you want to be fair with a location if it's a business. So we took in minimal equipment. We didn't have monitors and things like that. I was just using the camera monitor to gauge focus and exposure and things like that. There was a couple of takes that were slightly soft, so I've been sharpening up those images. And why have I been doing that? Because when you get to this point in post-production, it's about gauging whether a technical issue or a creative issue, whether it's going to drag the audience out of the film. When you screen your film, you want your audience completely invested in what it is that you're presenting. So when it gets to this point of production, I'm gauging, okay, would I as an audience momentarily step out of the story because I'm kind of like, oh, what was that? Now, that could be for a number of reasons. It might be that the focus is slightly off, or it could be that there's a slight dink on the camera and the camera's kind of moved slightly. The tripod's maybe been nudged. It wasn't picked up on the day, and it's the take that you've decided to use, so then you go through and you want to stabilize that shot. But it's so interesting because I've been watching a lot of old 70s and 80s movies recently, and at the end of like takes or scenes, you'll see the camera move slightly, or a slight bang on the camera, and you don't really, well, I mean, you notice it, but it doesn't stop your enjoyment of the film. And I think like there was a handmade quality, especially in the 70s. Some of those films, like me and Will Herbert in that episode discussed the sort of grit under the nails, the dirt under the nails that you had in some of those 70s films that's kind of all but sort of been eradicated from cinema now. Everything is, not everything, but so many films you watch and it's glossy. And it should be, because a huge amount of money's been spent on it. But with indie, there's those compromises that you have to make whereby it's not going to be as slick as something that's had millions and millions of dollars spent on it. So it's finding that happy medium between, okay, is this going to distract the audience? Can I get away with it? Not get away with it, but will the audience still be invested and not step out of the story because of a mistake? Or is it something that I need to address? So when it gets to this point in the production, it's about figuring out what needs addressing. So that might be things like visual effects. So over the past week, Miranda's been doing some visual effects on the film, basic using After Effects, and it might even be something as simple as freezing out a section of a phone that's flickering, for instance. Because when you shoot a mobile phone, sometimes the light creates like a flicker that you wouldn't notice in real life. So it might be doing something like that just to stop the audience going, what's going on with that phone? Equally, we had, and this is again where indie, you constantly battling the elements. So we shot a sequence, and two of the actors were only there for that particular day. On the day it absolutely pissed it down. which was obviously difficult for the actors because it meant we were shooting in the rain, and it was obviously difficult for the crew because they were also out in the rain. At one point, I remember saying to Miranda, we might have to cancel this and come back at a later date. But we took 10 minutes, we had a tea break, and we thought about how to attack this sequence, and then we did it. But one character actually had glasses on, and obviously this led to issues because on certain takes he was more steamed up than on others. Now, in hindsight, I probably should have said, listen, like, I know originally your costume was with those glasses, but like, things have changed drastically. Perhaps we should just take them off now. But we'd already kind of committed to it because we'd done a few takes. So what that meant was, like, Miranda has now had to match up the sort of steam on the glasses, just not exactly matching it, but just so that the audience aren't pulled out of the film, because what I had on the timeline initially was, like, he'd be very steamed up, the glasses would be very steamed up, and then they'd be a lot clearer in another take. And that's the kind of thing where you're looking at and you're going, okay, that will pull the audience out. And if you're doing multiple takes, this is why these huge Hollywood films will have someone just specifically on set taking photos, looking at continuity. With indie, you don't have those luxuries, so you kind of, a lot of the time, you're empowering the actors to take control of the continuity for their costume, for their hair, things like that. It doesn't always work. Sometimes, like, they're in the moment and they forget what they've done, and then in post you're having to, okay, I need to blend that a little bit better, so to speak. So that's kind of where we're at with it. And I think sometimes an actor might contact you, not one on this project, but on previous projects, and they might be like, so, where's the film at? When's the film going to be ready? And for them, they've done their 1 week or 2 weeks worth of work, and they're, in their minds, they've possibly got ideas of Hollywood films where you shoot and then a year or 18 months later it's finished. I think of when I was shooting X. So we had a sequence that was set at Abbey Road, and we went and shot there at kind of 5-6 in the morning. Might have even been earlier. It might have been more like 4 a.m. And we were shooting at Abbey Road, and it was kind of, the film builds towards it, essentially. This sequence shot at the famous crossing, the Beatles Abbey Road crossing, and we were so when was X shot? So we were shooting X between 2017 and kind of November 2018. So it was in production for like a year, and it was the only way to do it, really, because you're staggering a production, because you're working around actor availability, you're working around your own resources in terms of budget and time. And whilst we were shooting and whilst we were in production, it was announced that Danny Boyle was making a film called Yesterday. And Yesterday is a film about what would the world be like if the Beatles never existed, and or a couple of people can remember the Beatles and remember their music, and this one guy gets pretty famous by singing their songs. But I remember that film was announced, it was shot, edited, released before we even finished X. Now, not the shoot, but then the post-production. So that film, within like a year of being announced, was out in cinemas. And it can operate that way when you've got the money, because money buys you more people, it buys you more manpower. So when you look at the credits of a large feature film, even, I don't know, 10 million, you see all the names at the end of the film. All of them names are speeding up the time that it takes for you to finish a film. Now, Notion and X was primarily myself and also Miranda. We were kind of doing everything. So that's the edit, that's the sound, that's the sorting out the sound levels, that's any ADR that we need to do where we're cutting the takes together. even now, like Miranda did some visual effects on X, and she's also doing visual effects on Notion. And so every time you do one task, another task is not being completed. So whilst I try and sharpen these soft shots, that's time that you're not working on another element. So that might be sort of final sound effects or final touches to the edit. And it becomes hard juggling those things. And so I think sometimes like actors or people who even just follow you on social media might think, oh, is that not done? I thought that project was way in the bag by now and well on its way to even being released. And I think sometimes indie, it struggles to kind of compete with those larger productions, and sometimes I think that means that people are keen to get a film finished and out, and they possibly sacrifice the edit or the story being as clear and effective as it could be. But you've got to kind of hold true to what you want this film to be. And even with Notion, when I think that some colleagues at some point said, oh, how long is it? And I was like, oh, it's about 2.5 hours. And I've said this before. People are like, oh, you need to get that down. And it's like, but why? The film will be what it is, and bringing the business mindset into art, it doesn't work for me. And you don't have it. I say this over and over again. You don't have it in other art forms, that this obsession that, okay, this thing to be successful has to do this, and this. Film is a very young art form, just over 100 years old, and there's a great interview with Francis Ford Coppola in which he says that once it became an industry, people stopped taking risks. But to make anything beautiful, he says you need to take risks, and he compares it to having a baby. He said it's like having no sex and expecting a baby to appear. So art needs risks, and so I think the job of indie is to present different types of stories, and if Notion has to be 2 hours 40, that's what it's going to be. And I always think anyway, the people who say, oh, it could be shorter, would they watch it anyway? I mean, what was interesting with any film I've made, like when sometimes you see the reviews on Amazon or IMDb and you look at what these people usually watch, and it's like, well, they don't watch indie films, they don't watch micro budget films, so why did they think this would appeal to them? And obviously that happened to an extreme extent with Blurred Lines. But it's a kind of frustrating point at this back end, because this is the section of production where films sometimes don't get finished. I once met a filmmaker through a filmmaker that I knew, and he'd been working on this feature for literally 27 years. And a baby that appears in one scene is later shown as a fully grown adult in another. And I wonder why that was. Like, that's not just a case of not having the means, because like I'm guessing he had the means of production, because to be shooting in like the 90s, he would have had to been doing it possibly on film, and then maybe he moved to digital technology. But I think also like the thing that starts kicking in is that fear of being judged. And compared to larger scale productions, but that's not kind of why we make art, is it? We make art to express ourselves, to tell stories. It's a human need to share our experience and tell our story. And I think as time goes on, like when I think about some of these 70s films that I was discussing before, like they do have these like what we would deem technical errors, or they do have that dirt under their nails, and I'm all right with getting back to that a little bit. So when I'm at this point, it is about gauging, okay, is that raw? Is that like something that like Cassavetes would say, okay, that can go, we're all right with that, or Herzog would say that would be all right, or is it distracting? And I think you do have to compromise a little bit with audiences now, because they do want the non-distracting. Well, I'm making sweeping statements here, but generally I think people do judge a less glossy product. And like, even that word product, it's it doesn't quite sit right with me. It's a film, it's a story. So I do think it's about finding that happy medium, and where I'm at with Notion now is gauging when it's okay to say, right, that's it. So the plan for moving forward essentially is me and Miranda are going to do a series of screenings. We're going to watch it a few times, and each time, if there's anything, we kind of stop the film. Anything that pulls us out, we stop the film, and we're going to pause it and make the change there and then. Like, okay, that doesn't quite work, let's change it. The colour, the light, a slight sound. It could be a cut. Oh, that was, maybe you need a few more frames on that shot there, or maybe you need a few less frames. And it really does get into that niggly feeling of, oh, that's a bit abrupt. You need a few frames on that. And when we think the film's 24 frames per second, so when you gauge in every second, is that the right frame to cut on? That's where you've got millions of decisions to make around what this thing becomes. And any film you make, you start out with one idea and it becomes something else entirely. I mean, you have an idea of what it will look like in your head and what you hope to get to towards the end. And Guillermo del Toro said success as a filmmaker is becoming better at saying, this is what I want, and the film, that day's footage, looks like what you imagined. But with indie, you've got to take a few more compromises. I'll give an example. So one thing I've been doing over the past week is I've had someone stabilising some of the shots, and that's because there's a key sequence, and when we started shooting that sequence, the performances weren't quite right, and it didn't feel as authentic as what I was aspiring for. It felt a bit more scripted. So after a few, well, say we did a handful of takes, we stopped and I said, right, okay, let's regroup. Let's think about what it is we're going to do. And originally this sequence was thoroughly storyboarded, but we cancelled shooting for that day. And what we did was we just walked the actors through what was going to happen in this sequence. And it's quite a big sequence. So we spent the rest of that day just mapping it out. Okay, here's where we need a bit more aggression, or here's where we need a bit of softness in the performance, and really tracking that roller coaster of emotions that you might have if you're in an argument, for example. But what that meant was, when we came to do it, and I really do think it benefited the actors, because then they could go, okay, I've got a much better idea now of how to track this than just breaking it down into shots and cuts, and okay, this bit happens here, this bit happens over here. And we did it as like a full 30-minute take, and the actors were incredible. Like, we were starting 30 minutes later, we were high-fiving because we had a full take of that scene. And it was actually in the script, it's a few scenes, and we decided to just shoot it all as one take, each bit. But what that meant was there was sacrifices that had to be made in terms of shot composition and in terms of production value, because I wasn't getting the chance to set up in the way that I'd like for each take. They were moving to the space that they were operating in, and I was capturing it almost like a documentary instead. And so there is a compromise that's been made for that sequence in terms of the visuals, in terms of production value, in terms of shot composition. Sometimes it might be that I'm pulling focus as an actor's speaking a line of dialogue, or the camera might shake a little bit, so you're stabilizing it slightly. But actually, I think, like, it's almost like one of those things that becomes like a happy accident, that you do descend into like a documentary style, which wasn't the plan, but as the film kind of goes on, it becomes looser, which kind of tracks the state of the characters. They become their true selves, and they speak more honestly with each other, and the camera reflects that. And for me, I think it's way more important for a performance to feel genuine than for the camera to be perfect. I just do. I think there's enough films that have taught me that lesson, but the one in particular that I'll always go back to is Festen, or even something like the past sequences in Blurred Lines. I wish the past sequences in Blue Valentine, which is Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams. Like those sequences in Blue Valentine, the scenes that are set in the past, they were shot in 1 or 2 takes, and the directors wanted to do that in minimal takes, so that it had that feeling of spontaneity, and the camera has a freedom. So like in one scene, you see the camera kind of step off a curb almost as Ryan Gosling starts singing a song to Michelle Williams. In another scene, the 2 characters run backwards because they're having like they're on a date. It's like kind of cute stuff, and they're running backwards and they're laughing and giggling, and the camera just runs after them, and it's just completely shaky. And so the camera does have that feeling that replicates the character's state of mind, that they are free, that they are spontaneous, that this is all new and fresh, because the camera's not locked off in the same way as it is in the present scenes. In the present scenes, the camera's locked off, lots of close-ups because the characters are literally in their head. And then Festen, which is just a masterpiece. That's one of these Dogme films, Dogme 95, where there was a series of limitations that the filmmakers put in place. All audio had to be captured on the day, no artificial lighting, can only be lit with what's available, no genre, all these. I think there's like 10 rules, you'll have to go and check them out, but Dogme 95, the filmmakers created these rules to avoid falling into kind of generic filmmaking. And what you have is a film like Festen, which is shot on like a camcorder. I mean, it really does look like shit, but you are so engaged in that story and those performances. So when it was a case of what to sacrifice in Notion, and this is where indie, like on, I don't know, say Spielberg's got his new film out, and he apparently doesn't storyboard now. I mean, on his early films he storyboarded, but now he's kind of shows up on the day and he decides how he's going to block out the action, where the camera's going to go, how the camera's going to move. You can do that when you've got a huge crew, and it can still have an improvised feel but look very slick, because money buys you manpower. But when the crew is myself and Miranda shooting this large sequence with 2 actors, and Miranda did incredible, to be honest, because she was following the actors and ensuring that she got the sound on these 30-minute takes. Incredible. And Miranda has no formal training in sound recording. But for me, sound, it's like, can you hear it? Is it audible? And really, the only sound issues we have in that sequence is where there was banging from other flats. Like the flat that we were shooting in, there was people banging in other rooms, so we kind of like cleaned that stuff up. And we were literally just following the actors for these 30-minute takes. And what we would do is we would do one take where we would focus on one character, one take where we'd focus on another, and we'd just reverse it like that. So okay, we'll predominantly focus on you during this take, and we did about 8-9 takes of this of these 30-minute takes. And in the end, it sped up the production incredibly, and it led to very authentic performances that you can track start to finish in this sequence. But what this relates back to now is you gauging as a viewer, well, trying to be a viewer, as the editor, as the filmmaker, as the director. Okay, where does this look a little too rough? What can we do to tighten this up so that someone just stumbling across this film won't be taken out of the emotion, because it's about putting an audience in the middle, for me, of that story. So that's where I'm at with the project. And I know sometimes, like, for actors in particular or people following you on social media, it must be like, geez, where the fuck's this film? But this is the reason why indie takes time, and we're now in year 3 of Notion post production. But like, I'm not the first filmmaker equally that's spent that amount of time on a project. I always go back for inspiration to Werner Herzog, and when I'm feeling like, okay, this suddenly feels not very achievable, I think about his filmmaking. Films like Aguirre, where he was shooting in the jungle. Films like Fitzcarraldo, again in the jungle. That's the film where there's a character who decides to put a boat, a steamship, over a mountain so that he can get it onto the river on the other side. And the production problems that he encountered on that film, he'd shot, I don't know how much exactly, but he'd started shooting with an actor. The actor then fell ill. Mick Jagger was due to be in it as the main character's sidekick. He'd shot a bunch of footage, a bunch of scenes, and then when the actor fell ill, he had to go off on tour with the Rolling Stones. And so Herzog was back to square one. Okay, I've started shooting this film, and most people would throw in the towel. And I always think of that quote, there's never an excuse not to finish a film. Like, he'd started on this journey. And there's a wonderful documentary by Les Blanc called Burden of Dreams, and it's about the making of Fitzcarraldo. And he says, if I gave up this project, I'd be a man without dreams, and I don't want to live without dreams. So he went again, and he considered casting himself as Fitzcarraldo. And for those of you who've seen him in The Mandalorian or Jack Reacher, he's someone who's quite capable of giving a performance, Werner Herzog. And recently I watched the Hulk Hogan documentary on Netflix, and he appears in like episode 3 and talks about wrestling. And then I was thinking, oh damn, I wish he just made the whole documentary, a whole Hulk Hogan documentary by Werner Herzog. But anyway, a little aside. But with Fitzcarraldo, he considered playing the character himself. And then finally, he went to Klaus Kinski. And there's a documentary Herzog made called My Best Fiend about the collaborations that he and Kinski, the films that they made together. And it's a great documentary. Apparently, Herzog, he arranged to meet with Kinski, and Kinski popped open a bottle of champagne and said, Fitzcarraldo, I knew it was going to be me. So off he went into the jungle all excited, and then within a few days of being there, he's going crazy at the crew. He's threatening to kill people. Some of the natives offered to kill Klaus Kinski. They said to Herzog, shall we kill him because of his behaviour? And if you watch the documentary, there's like shots of Klaus Kinski just going absolutely berserk. One of the producers or the production manager, I forget which, just going absolutely berserk. And that film took like 3 years in production. Obviously, what they had to overcome was incredible. Like, and by comparison, Notion is relatively easy. So you just hold on to these stories as an independent filmmaker of getting films over the finish line. I mean, if Herzog can do that with an actor who's just completely out of control, doing such a difficult task, because like at one point 20th Century Fox offered Herzog the money, but they wanted to do it all with miniatures. Herzog was like, no, he wanted the shots of the ship being pulled up a hill. And I think there's one shot in the end that ends up being a miniature when a boat crashes. Well, I know, because in Berlin there's a film museum which is actually it's an incredible museum. I thoroughly recommend it. About the history of German cinema. If you're ever in Berlin, you've got to go. It's absolutely incredible. And in one section of the museum, they have the boat that was used for this one shot, and it was like kind of a a dream come true when I saw it. I was just like in awe. I had like loads of pictures with it, and it was still a real big model, like much bigger than me. Um, but they used it for like one or two shots where the boat collides against a wall at one point as it's going downriver. And I mean, by today's standards, it's kind of noticeable. They're much better now at blending these things, but again, it goes back to that thing of, is this taking anything away from the overarching narrative and the themes and ideas that you're trying to present? I don't think it does. I think you still watch Fitzcarraldo now, and you're engaged with that lead character and his what the madness of what he's trying to attempt, regardless of one or two miniature shots. That's just kind of how they're telling the story at that point in time. And there's always going to be advances in technology, and films are going to be able to be slicker still in 10 years' time. I mean, that's one of the things with film education. You train people on cameras and you train them about ideas. 10 years ago, if you were training filmmakers, no one had the idea of AI. Well, maybe some people did, but no one thought that AI would be as prevalent as it is now, and the things that that's doing or going to do in terms of film production. So, like, you can only do and train for what you have at that moment in time, and that's how I'm approaching the post production for Notion, but also my other feature films. When I finished X, I was tempted to go back and like tweak things. I really was, and I'd done a lot of tweaking on the film. Like I'd done loads of little niggly things with sound and levels and the brightness and darkness and shadows on images and the cuts. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe I should just. And Miranda was like, no, because the fact is that time can be spent on a new project, and it was the right thing to do. Because say when I get to 60, is it better to have had 5-6 features, or is it better to have one that's perfect? I think it's better to have more than one. And Herzog's testament to that. Like, yes, spend the time on a project, get it as good as it can possibly be, take it to the level that you're capable of, but then let go. And a film like Eraserhead as well, where David Lynch spent 5 years making that film. These are just kind of inspiring to me that, okay, if it takes half a decade, and when you say it like that, it's frightening, but if it takes half a decade, that's what it takes. That's not going to be the case, thankfully. And the plan is to have this finished in July, touch wood. There's still a handful of things to do. Well, more than a handful. And we're still going to watch it back on various devices and get it ready. But then kind of the next step is, then what? And this is why the business people think they have all these plans of release beforehand, because they're not just showing up with a finished film and going, here's my finished film. Like, that's what David Lynch could do back in the day. Here's my finished film, and release it, and then hopefully find an audience. But now you've kind of got to start thinking about all these things. And with X, I was probably a little bit better at that, to be honest, like posting on Instagram, posting updates. With Notion and Blurred Lines, I've not had the time really, and that's where it's like you almost need a social media manager to be building up engagement. And I know, like with Empire of Lies, where I spoke to the filmmakers on that project a number of podcasts back, they're really thinking about how to get an audience to engage with their film. And like they've even done a new poster to tie the film into some of the conspiracies of Disclosure Day, the new Spielberg film. So they're updating the posters in relation to what else is happening within the industry, and it seems to work. Like Jonathan Sadler's posted a number of things on his LinkedIn about engagement with social media posts and things like that. And I think it is just about thinking about new ways of getting an audience engaged in your work. And when you look at what's happened with the two YouTube, I say YouTube filmmakers, they're just filmmakers because YouTube is just another platform, Backrooms and also Obsession, these two films where the filmmakers have been creating on YouTube, building an audience, and then they've suddenly gone on to this huge success with their two feature films. So Backrooms is by a 20-year-old, which is kind of mind-blowing. And then I believe Obsession, the filmmaker's 26. And they've just built up their audience, and then someone's liked what they were doing and put money into it. In the case of Obsession, that film was made for $750,000. And I keep seeing people discuss it as a low-budget film. And yes, it is low-budget by Hollywood standards, but to me, that is huge. Like, to have 750,000 to make a film would be incredible. But again, and Backrooms is the same actually, but I believe that was about 10 million, and people are discussing that as a low-budget film. But these films have made huge amounts of money at the box office now because they already have a built-in audience. And I saw the Red Letter Media team discussing this on their YouTube channel, that what's interesting at the minute though, even though there are these breakout success stories, there's a lot of filmmakers on YouTube that aren't having that level of success, obviously. But also, it's in horror specifically that these successes are happening, whereby people are starting off very low budget and then building to something much larger. Like the Red Letter Media team were saying, where's the kind of next Paul Thomas Anderson? Where are the people who are going to make the dramas, the indie dramas that become huge successes? That doesn't seem to be happening in the same way. 20, 30 years ago, you had to tell a good story because visual effects weren't to the standard that they are now. Like now you can do so much in a computer. I saw Spielberg recently discussing the amount of effects that were in 2001 A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick film, and he said something, I think there was something like 200 or 500. And Spielberg's like, just any standard drama's got more than that. And I'm seeing it with Notion, and this is to bring it kind of full circle. Like 20, 30 years ago, I wouldn't be thinking about changing the flicker on a mobile phone or going back and doing some sharpening on a shot. Like what you had was what you shot. And if it wasn't in camera, there was nothing that you could kind of do with it. So that's why you do have these indie dramas by Cassavetes or others that are a little rough around the edges, but now like audiences have more of an expectation of what a film should look like and what it shouldn't look like. So you're trying to minimize those blemishes as well as you can at the level that you're working at. And obviously Notion is a film that was shot for around 20,000. The first shoot in 2023 was kind of 10,000-ish, and then last summer we shot the two short films that were kind of around 10,000, so we're coming in just over 20,000, and that's a real low budget film, really, like super low budget. It's the most I've ever spent on a project, but it makes it sustainable. Like I know that I can make another, and that's important to me, to be able to make art on my terms, that I'm not having to compromise. Like the more money you accept, the more compromises that you have to make, unless you're at the top of your game, like Christopher Nolan, Spielberg, like Guillermo del Toro. These people aren't having to make compromises. They're able, well, I mean, Guillermo del Toro talked about compromises on early projects, but for Frankenstein, for instance, 125 million to make his passion project. It's incredible. So yeah, at this level, you are just doing the best that you can, and it means accepting sometimes delays even, because those two sequences that we shot last summer, the short films, I'm still waiting on the color grade. Now I'm not blaming anyone, but life happens. Like people have jobs, people have personal issues that they have to deal with. So those short films are yet to be graded, and I'm gonna have a meet up with the grader, the colorist for those sequences, hopefully in the coming weeks. But it's not so much of an issue now because I've still got other tasks that I need to be doing. But at some point, the bit that's difficult with indie filmmaking is pulling all of that together. On a huge feature film, you've got producers, you've got production managers, you've got post-production supervisors, all these people ensuring that those deadlines are happening so that it can be finished for the June 25th release date or the December 2026 release date, whatever it might be. And you've got so many people that those deadlines are constantly being hit, whereas indie, you're the person who's like constantly having to pull this thing along. And sometimes that means even when you're doing something fun that's not related to the film, you're thinking, but the film isn't getting finished. And that might be something as simple as going out to the cinema for one evening, or going out for dinner, or going seeing a friend or a family member. It's like another day that the film's not being finished, and that's difficult. And so it's about balancing all these elements of budget, time, living a life, and it's tough. So I think this is why not many people make indie features, because it's hard to keep picking yourself up to do that thing again. Like, most people make one and then they want to leap in budget to make another because they want it to be easier in some way or more manageable. I've kind of accepted that that's not always going to be the case, and part of it is like that thing, paints temporary, films forever. And so, like, in a year's time, when Notion is done and people have seen it, and there's like hopefully been some positive feedback, like, all of this at the minute that you're dealing with, of these pressures of finishing, will hopefully be way in the back of my mind then. So this has been more of an update episode on where I'm at, and hopefully not too rambly. Hopefully a good insight into where I'm at with the production and where I'm at in terms of thinking about filmmaking. And I'll see you again next week. Thank you.